Thank you for joining me on this tutorial. This is AnnHelen. We're using this picture from Pinterest that I converted to black and white. First, I block in the forms or the shapes of the overall images that I see on the left. Then I use my revised Loomis method to put in the proportions of the eyebrows, eyes, nose, and mouth according to the size and shape and height of these features. This is a slightly advanced tutorial because the face or the head direction is that of a tilted at a 3/4 angle. Please watch my other tutorials that are more beginner friendly if this one is too hard for you. I draw in the construction lines for the head and the facial features very lightly because I know I will be making lots of adjustments. I'm constantly comparing the things I'm drawing to that on the reference photo. And I'm keeping my drawing relatively small so that it will be easier for me to see proportional problems. And don't feel bad if you can't get the facial proportions right in the beginning. Even master artists and portrait artists need to spend a lot of time to get the facial proportions right. So I don't expect my finished portrait to look very similar to the photo reference. And especially with the time constraints of this tutorial, it will definitely not look identical to the photo reference. So you can remove the pressure from yourself to be perfect or try to draw perfectly. To make this portrait drawing process much easier, I recommend the following things. First, get a paper copy of the reference photo that you see to approximately the size you want to draw. I did get a printout for my reference photo on the left side of this notepad, even though you can't see it. When your drawing is about the same size as your reference, it will be much easier for you to find the proportional differences and also measure the distances between these facial features. And the second thing to make a portrait or facial drawing much easier is to always start from the center of the face. And by center of the face, I mean the two horizontal lines for the eyebrows and eyes and the vertical line for the nose. Where these lines intersect, that is the center of the face. And it determines the sizes and proportions of the facial features that are at the center, but also those that are further away from the center. When you need to adjust the center of the face, the rest of your facial proportions will also need to be adjusted. And that means if you start to draw your facial features from the eyes and the nose, you will solve a lot or prevent a lot of these unnecessary proportional issues later. And I'm doing just that. I just readjusted the size and the proportions of the eyes relative to each other, and now I have to go down the nose and the mouth to adjust them accordingly. I used to start my facial drawings with just one eye, but I forgot to measure just how big the whole head is going to be, so a lot of my drawings ended up being very lopsided or got too big to fit on the sketch paper. But I've learned to block in the overall shape of the image first so that they will all fit on the paper. Then I continue with the head structure and then the facial proportions. The flowers on the hair are so pretty, but I just don't think there's enough time in this tutorial for me to show you how to block those in. So we're not going to draw the flowers, but to just fill in and draw in the hair that's covered by these flowers. But I do want to include the very nice braid that's going down the side of her neck to her shoulder, because I think that's a very important part of this composition. You need to make decisions like this if you're using reference photos for your drawing, or even if you're using live models. You don't need to be a slave to your photo reference, or for that matter, even your own drawing. And right now, I could see a lot of problems that I have in this drawing, but that's fine, because I learn better when I make mistakes. So don't be too hard on yourself when you make mistakes. You could say this drawing is a result of the hundreds or even thousands of mistakes I've made before. But I've learned from those mistakes how not to make them or how to adjust them. And think of your current drawing as a preparation or practice for your next drawing. I've started shading from the darkest values, that is the hair. Please watch carefully as I shade in these darks and lighter areas in the hair, and later on when I shade in the skin tone areas. If you can't remember anything else from this tutorial, remember this. You're not a slave to your reference photo. You can make all the necessary or even unnecessary changes. And you're also not a slave to your own drawing because you're using a very forgiving medium, the graphite pencil, and with a good eraser like a kneadable eraser or kneaded eraser, you can continue to make changes or adjustments to your own drawing. I just shaded in the first layer of my darkest values, the hair, and I'm starting to shade in the darkest areas of the skin tone. This is a very good rule of thumb for using graphite pencils or even charcoal when you're shading. Basically, want to start shading in the darker values and advance to the medium, then the lighter values. I'm holding my pencil very far from the tip, you can barely see it, but this way my hand relaxes and I'm able to use the smallest force to shade in the skin areas. I'm using a 2B graphite pencil for the shading of the skin areas, but since I'm proceeding to even lighter areas, I'm using less and less force. The cheek that is farther from us seems to be a little lighter than the cheek to the left of us. But here at the nose bridge, there's a very strong shadow, but it is still not too dark. By shading in the darkest dark first, I'm setting boundaries for my other medium dark and lighter areas. Except for the shadows on the left jaw and under the jaw on the neck, most of the shadows on the face are form shadows. Basically, form shadows are any planes on the surface of objects that turns away from the light. Form shadows are usually not as dark as cast shadows. A good example of cast shadows is the area between the jaw, left jaw, and the neck, or on the neck. From the photo, I can see that the light is coming from the top slightly over to our right. So the head structure is blocking the light from the neck, and that creates the cast shadow on the neck. There's a small dark area right under the earlobe, and that's a shadow cast by the earlobe on the neck. It's helpful to keep in mind the differences between the cast shadows and the form shadows, because a cast shadow on the skin is usually darker than the form shadow on the skin. If you feel like you've learned something from this tutorial or you have simply enjoyed it, please click the like or thumbs up button. And please consider joining my channel so that you'll be notified whenever I post a new tutorial. Please leave your comments and positive constructive suggestions in the comments section. Your support means that I can continue to make tutorials like this for free. And this will also help YouTube to push more of my tutorials to people who want to level up their drawing skills. Thank you so much for your support.